She only wanted to look, just for a moment, at a dress she could never afford. But the clerk's laughter cut through her like glass. "You can't afford this." And just when shame burned behind her eyes, a voice behind her said, "Put it on my card." That single sentence changed everything, because sometimes kindness doesn't come wrapped in roses. It arrives quietly, in a stranger's voice on an ordinary day, and rewrites the story you stopped believing could change. The morning sunlight poured gently over the city like spilled honey, glinting off glass windows and washing the streets in gold. The world was waking, buses sighed, vendors arranged fruit under striped awnings, and footsteps mingled with the hum of 1,000 small beginnings. Inside the heart of that busy rhythm, a quiet young woman stood before a shop window, her breath fogging the glass ever so slightly. Her name was Alina. She wore a faded gray coat, one that had seen too many winters, and her hair, a chestnut wave that fell loosely over her shoulders, carried the kind of softness that life hadn't quite managed to harden. Her eyes, wide, uncertain, lingered on a dress displayed behind the window. It was pale blue, flowing, almost weightless, like it could dance on its own if the wind whispered kindly enough. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, not to touch the fabric, but to hold a small piece of what she dreamed of: grace, beauty, belonging. The kind of things she'd long ago learned not to expect. Inside, the boutique was all gleam and hush. Marble floors reflected chandeliers that dripped crystals like morning dew. Every rack seemed curated for someone else, the kind of women who didn't check price tags, who didn't work double shifts, who smiled without thinking of bills. Alina stood at the door for a long moment before finally stepping in. The sound of the bell above her head was small but sharp. It broke the quiet, and the quiet broke her nerve. A clerk behind the counter, a tall woman with perfect lipstick and a colder gaze, looked up immediately. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice clipped, polite but hollow. I just wanted to look," Alina said softly. The clerk's eyes moved, from Alina's worn shoes to her fraying scarf. The judgment wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. "Of course," she said, the way people say, "of course," when they mean, "Why are you here?" Alina nodded, pretending not to notice, and wandered slowly through the aisles. Her fingers brushed the edges of silk, lace, and velvet. Each dress had a story stitched into it, stories that didn't belong to her world. She stopped at that same blue dress, now hanging close enough to touch. It was simple yet impossibly elegant, like something out of a memory she never lived. She held the edge of its sleeve, letting it slip through her fingers. "How much is this one?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The clerk didn't even glance up from her phone. "That one's $1,200. Alina's heart faltered, her fingers letting go immediately as if the fabric burned. "Oh," she breathed, "I see." But something in her, maybe pride, maybe hope, made her linger for a few seconds too long. The clerk looked up then, smirking. "You can't afford that dress," she said, her tone light but her words sharp enough to slice. "Maybe try the sale rack near the back. We have some older designs." The world seemed to stop around that moment. Just the tick of a clock, and the sound of her heartbeat echoing against the quiet. Alina's lips trembled, but she didn't answer. She simply nodded once and turned, her eyes glistening. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about the 100 other times the world had told her she didn't belong. The job interviews where she wasn't quite what they were looking for. The neighbors who offered sympathy like pity wrapped in politeness. The loneliness of a small apartment where her dreams had started to whisper themselves into silence. As she turned to leave, the bell over the door chimed again. A man walked in, tall, composed, the kind of quiet presence that filled a room without demanding it. His suit was neat but understated, not the kind that boasted wealth, but the kind that fit like it belonged there. He had kind eyes, though, and a voice that carried warmth when he spoke to the clerk. "Good morning," he said. The clerk straightened instantly, her tone changing as though a switch had flipped. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" Alina lowered her gaze and tried to pass by, her face still hot with humiliation. But as she reached the door, she heard the man speak again, his voice steady, calm, curious. "Excuse me," he said gently. She froze, not sure if he was speaking to her. "You dropped this," he continued, holding out a small notebook. Her notebook, the one she carried everywhere, filled with small sketches, quotes, dreams she still dared to write. "Oh, thank you," she said, startled, taking it from him. Their fingers brushed, just slightly, but enough for something to shift, something small and human. He smiled, a soft, almost knowing smile. "You draw," he said, glancing at the cover where a faint pencil sketch peeked out. "Just sometimes," she replied quietly. "It's just for me." He nodded, as if that was the most honest answer in the world. And then his eyes moved toward the dress still hanging near the counter. The one she'd been looking at. He seemed to put the pieces together. Her red eyes, the way she stood, the silence between her and the clerk noticed his gaze and smiled brightly. "That one's from our new collection," she said quickly. "Would you like to see it for someone, sir?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes softened, then turned back to Alina. "Yes," he said finally. "For her." The clerk blinked. "I'm sorry." He stepped closer, his tone still calm, still kind. "Put it on my card." The silence that followed was absolute, like the whole shop forgot how to breathe. Alina froze, confusion flooding her face. "Wait, no, you don't have to." But he only looked at her, steady and gentle. "I know," he said, "but I want to." The clerk's smile faltered. For once, she had nothing to say. Alina's throat tightened. She didn't even know this man's name, yet his words felt like sunlight breaking through a cloud she'd lived under too long. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why?" she whispered. He met her eyes. Kind, steady, unhurried. Because no one should ever be made to feel small for dreaming. And for the first time in years, she didn't know whether to cry or to smile or to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world still had a little kindness left in it. She held the blue dress against her chest, tears quietly tracing her cheeks. The bell over the door chimed softly as someone entered again, but in that moment it felt like the whole city had gone still, watching, waiting, holding its breath. Outside, the light deepened, falling gently over the boutique windows. And inside, two strangers stood at the edge of something they didn't yet understand. A small act of kindness had shifted the air. And though neither of them knew it, that single moment, that single sentence, would change both of their lives forever. Rain came softly that evening, not the kind that storms, but the kind that sighs. It slid down the glass panes of Alina's apartment window in slow trails, catching the dim glow of the city lights outside. The world beyond seemed distant and blurred, as though seen through the glass of a dream she hadn't fully woken from. The blue dress hung on the back of her chair, still wrapped in delicate paper, as though it didn't quite belong in her small, worn-out world. It looked almost unreal, a fragment of some other life that had slipped into hers by mistake. She sat before it, the receipt still folded neatly on the table beside a cup of cold tea. The words, "paid in full," seemed to mock her disbelief. She didn't even know his name. All she remembered was the calm in his voice, because no one should ever be made to feel small for dreaming. The line played in her mind again and again like the echo of a song that refused to fade. The next morning, sunlight cut through the thin curtains and spilled over her small room, over the cracked walls, the chipped mug on the counter, the blue dress still hanging untouched. She had to go to work, but her thoughts lingered elsewhere. Her job at the local cafe wasn't glamorous. The pay barely covered rent, but she liked the smell of coffee, the rhythm of small talk, and the soft hum of life that filtered through its doors. People came and went, and sometimes she felt invisible. But that day, for some reason, she didn't mind being seen. At the cafe, her coworker Mara noticed her distracted smile. "You look different today," Mara said, teasingly. "What happened? Someone finally wrote you a love letter." Alina laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Something like that," she whispered. She wanted to tell her about the man, the dress, the moment, but it felt too fragile, too precious to expose, like a secret the world would ruin if spoken too soon. Hours passed. She poured coffees, cleared tables, and smiled through fatigue. The doorbell chimed over and over as customers drifted in and out. Then, the bell chimed once more, and something in her chest tightened before she even looked up. He was standing there. The stranger. He looked different in daylight, less like a story, more like a man. His hair was slightly windblown, his sleeves rolled casually, and his eyes still carried that steady kindness she couldn't forget. For a second she froze, unsure if he even recognized her. But then he smiled, the same gentle curve of lips that had steadied her heart in the boutique. "Hey," he said simply. Elena blinked, trying to steady her breath. You're here?" "I am," he said, glancing around. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me again, but I realized I never told you my name. I'm Daniel." "Elena?" she replied softly, her lips curving faintly. "I know it's late, but thank you for what you did." He shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I just—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I couldn't stand there and watch someone get humiliated for something so small. You deserved better." Her throat tightened again. "People don't usually notice," she said quietly. "They look away or pretend it doesn't happen." He nodded. "I've looked away too many times before. Not anymore." There was a silence, gentle, almost comfortable. Rain began again outside, tapping faintly against the windows like a heartbeat. "Can I get you something?" she asked finally, trying to ground herself. He smiled. "Coffee. Whatever you'd recommend." She nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she turned to prepare it, she caught a glimpse of his reflection in the cafe mirror. Patient, calm, watching her with quiet interest. Not in a way that made her nervous, but in a way that made her feel seen. She brought the coffee to his table. "Here," she said, placing it down carefully. He took a sip, then smiled again. "You make good coffee. It's the beans," she said, a shy smile breaking through. They talked about little things at first. Books, the city, how the world felt too loud sometimes. He told her he worked in architecture, that he'd been away for years and only recently come back. His life sounded full: meetings, travel, clients, but his words carried the same quiet ache she felt in herself. After a while, she asked, "Why were you in that boutique?" He hesitated, looking down at his cup. "My mother used to love that store," he said softly. "Before she passed away, I promised I'd buy her a dress from there. I never did." Elena's breath caught. He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "When I saw you standing there, I don't know. Something about it felt like I was getting a second chance to do something right." The rain outside deepened, streaking the glass like tears. She didn't speak. She just watched him. The way his hands wrapped around the cup, the quiet sincerity in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. "That's too much to say to someone I barely know." "No," she said softly. "It's not too much. It's honest." For a long time, neither of them moved. Just two souls sitting quietly in the hum of a small cafe, finding warmth in a world that often felt cold. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Will you wear the dress?" he asked gently. She looked down. "I don't know if I can. It feels too beautiful for me." He smiled, that same calm, knowing smile. "Maybe that's why you should." Then he left, just like that, leaving her in the soft rhythm of the rain, holding a cup that still felt warm from where he'd touched it. That night, she unwrapped the blue dress again. Her fingers traced the soft fabric as if she were touching a promise. She held it up to the light, and for the first time, she could almost see herself in it. Not the woman the world had dismissed, but the woman she could become. She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe I will." And as the city outside fell asleep beneath the rain, the blue dress swayed gently in the window light, waiting for the girl who would finally have the courage to wear it. Morning arrived soft and gold, brushing against the curtains of Elena's small apartment. The city below hummed its usual song, car horns, footsteps louder too far away to belong to her. But something inside her felt different that day. It was subtle, like a shift in the wind, fragile yet certain. The blue dress still hung by the window, glowing in the sunlight like a small miracle. She'd spent days just looking at it, circling around it like it was something sacred, something she wasn't yet worthy of. But Daniel's words echoed quietly in her memory. "Maybe that's why you should." That morning, she finally reached for it. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the fabric, feeling the smooth weight of silk slip through her fingers. She'd never owned anything so beautiful. When she slipped it over her head, it felt like the world stilled. The fabric settled softly against her skin, fitting her not like it was made for her body, but like it was made for her soul. For the first time in years, she looked at her reflection and didn't see what she lacked. She saw something else, something fragile but real. Dignity. Later that afternoon, the cafe was busier than usual. The chatter was loud, the scent of coffee thick in the air. Mara glanced up from the counter and nearly dropped her tray when Elena walked in. "Wait, what, Elena?" she gasped. "You look like, I don't even know, like you stepped out of a painting." Elena laughed softly, cheeks warming. "It's just a dress, just a dress." Mara shook her head. "No, that's the kind of dress that changes the way people look at you." What Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe the way I look at myself." The day passed like a blur. Customers, orders, laughter. But beneath it all was a quiet anticipation, one she couldn't quite name. Every time the doorbell chimed, her heart skipped, waiting, hoping. And then, as if the universe heard her thought, he came. Daniel stepped inside, rain glistening faintly on his shoulders, his tie loosened like he'd just escaped the rush of a long day. But the moment he saw her, he stopped. The air seemed to pause with him. She turned, catching his gaze. Their eyes met across the small cafe, and the noise of everything else faded. He smiled, slow, genuine, amazed. "You wore it?" he said softly when he reached her. She nodded, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "You told me I should. And you look—" He stopped himself, his voice low. "You look like someone who finally remembered who she is." Something in her heart stirred, something she'd kept buried under years of doubt. They sat down near the window, where the rain drummed softly on the glass. Outside, the street shimmered with reflections, umbrellas, headlights, the blur of passing people. Inside, the world was smaller, warmer. For a while, they didn't talk about big things. They spoke about art, about how Daniel loved to sketch old buildings in quiet corners of the city. She told him about the drawings in her notebook, the ones she never showed anyone. "Why not?" he asked. Because I'm not good enough, she said simply. He frowned gently. Who told you that? She hesitated. Life did. He leaned back thoughtful. Then maybe it's time life got corrected. The words landed like a promise. There was silence again, but not empty silence. The kind that hums with unspoken understanding. Do you ever feel like you're standing outside your own life? She asked suddenly. Like you're watching it through a window, but you can't step in. Daniel looked at her, his expression softening. All the time, he said, but then someone opens the door. She looked up at him, their eyes meeting again. For a long moment, neither of them looked away. Later, as the rain cleared, he asked if she wanted to walk. They stepped out into the cool evening, the pavement glistening beneath their feet. The city lights shimmered like distant constellations. The air smelled of rain and possibility. They walked without destination, just two quiet souls tracing the rhythm of the city together. She told him about her past, the art school she'd once dreamed of, the father who'd left too soon, the years she'd spent learning how to survive instead of how to live. Daniel listened, really listened, the way few people ever did. When she finally fell silent, he said softly, "You deserved more, but you still have time to become everything you were meant to be." She smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who believes that." "I have to," he said. "Because if I don't, what's all this for?" They reached the park at the edge of the street. Quiet now, just the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the city behind them. There, under the glow of a lone street lamp, she twirled once, shyly, playfully. The blue dress caught the light, swirling like water. He watched her, not with desire, but with awe. In that moment, she wasn't the girl who'd been mocked in a boutique. She wasn't the one who counted coins before rent was due. She was simply Alina, radiant, free, alive. And for the first time in years, she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a small one, but a full, unguarded sound that reached her eyes. Daniel joined her, his laughter blending with hers, soft and genuine. The city seemed to pause for them, just two people beneath the rain, polished glow of a streetlight, finding something they hadn't known they were searching for. As they said goodbye that night, Daniel reached for her hand. "Can I see you again?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because part of her was still afraid to hope. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something steady, not rescue, not pity, just kindness and truth. "Yes," she said quietly. "You can," he smiled, his thumb brushing her fingers briefly. "Then it's a promise." She watched him walk away, disappearing slowly into the glow of the city lights. And for once, the ache in her chest didn't feel like loss. It felt like the beginning of something worth waiting for. When she returned home that night, she stood before the mirror again. The blue dress still shimmered faintly in the low light. But this time she didn't see a girl trying to fit into something beautiful. She saw a woman becoming it. Autumn crept into the city like a slow confession, leaves loosening their hold, air growing tender and crisp. Weeks had passed since that night beneath the rain, and somewhere between shared coffees and quiet walks, something unspoken had begun to bloom between Alina and Daniel. They met often now, sometimes in the cafe after her shift, sometimes by the riverside, where the light scattered in silver ripples. They never called it love. Not yet. It was something gentler, something truer, a quiet trust that neither of them wanted to name too soon, for fear of breaking it. But as every story learns, even light casts shadows. One evening, Daniel arrived late. Alina was waiting at their usual bench near the old bridge, her sketchbook resting on her knees. The wind tangled her hair, the golden dress she'd worn that day brushing softly against her ankles. When she finally saw him approach, her smile faltered. His face was tense, eyes distant, the warmth she knew clouded by something heavier. "Sorry," he said quietly. "Work went long." She nodded. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Not the lateness. That didn't matter. But the distance in his voice. They sat together, watching the water slide beneath the bridge. The silence between them was no longer peaceful. It carried edges now. Finally, she asked, "What's wrong?" Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated." "Try me," she said softly. He hesitated, then looked at her with something like regret. "The company I work for, we're under investigation. There were contracts signed years ago, before I joined, but the media's digging everything up again. They're trying to link my name to it." Her brow furrowed. "But you didn't do anything wrong." "No," he said. "But the world doesn't wait for the truth. It just decides what looks believable." Alina reached for his hand. "Then you'll tell your truth." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is," she said. "Honesty usually is." He looked at her then. Really looked. And there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. "Elena," he began, voice low. "The boutique that day, the reason I was there wasn't entirely chance. My company owns that chain. The clerk who humiliated you, she worked for us. The words hung between them like smoke. She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. You, what? He nodded slowly. I was there for a routine inspection. That's why she changed so quickly when I walked in. The memory replayed in her mind. The sneer, the shift in tone, the sudden deference. So you knew, she whispered. You knew who she was, what kind of place it was. I didn't know she'd treat you that way, he said quickly. I didn't even see it happen until, but you bought me the dress. She interrupted, her voice breaking slightly. To fix it. Out of guilt? No, he said, standing now. No, Elena, I swear it wasn't that. I did it because you felt sorry for me, she said sharply, rising too. Because you thought I was some poor girl who needed saving. Her voice trembled. She wasn't shouting. She couldn't. But the hurt in her words filled the space between them. Daniel's face fell. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She whispered. What did any of this mean? He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. And maybe that was his mistake, silence, when what she needed most was truth. Elena shook her head slowly. You should go, she said quietly. Elena, please. There was no anger in her tone now, just exhaustion. The kind that comes when someone you've begun to trust reminds you of every reason you stopped trusting long ago. He nodded finally, his chest heavy. I'll go, he said softly. But it wasn't pity, Elena. Not once. She just turned toward the water, blinking fast, her reflection breaking in ripples. Daniel stood for a moment longer, watching her, the woman who'd taught him what gentleness looked like, and then he walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the rustle of fallen leaves. That night, the blue dress hung again by the window, untouched, unmoving. Elena sat in the dark, the city lights casting fractured reflections across her room. Her notebook lay open before her, blank. She wanted to draw, to release the ache somehow, but her hands refused to move. Her mind replayed every moment. The boutique, the cafe, the laughter, the park. Had any of it been real? Or had she just been another act of redemption for a man trying to erase his own guilt? Tears slid silently down her cheeks. For years, she'd built walls around her heart, careful, quiet walls that kept her safe. Daniel had been the first person to walk through without force, only kindness. And yet now she felt foolish for letting him in. She whispered into the empty room, why did you have to be kind if you weren't going to stay? The city outside carried on. Indifferent. Days passed. She didn't see him again. She went to work, smiled when required, pretended not to ache. Mara noticed the difference but didn't ask. Some wounds you don't speak of because naming them makes them real. But one afternoon, as she wiped down a table, a small envelope slipped under the cafe door. Her name was written on it carefully, almost hesitantly. Her heart stilled. She knew that handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a sketch of her, standing in the blue dress beneath the street lamp by the park. Her eyes were soft, her smile faint, and written at the bottom in quiet cursive were the words, because no one should ever be made to feel small for dreaming, not even me. Below it, one more line. If truth still matters, meet me where the world first stopped. Sunday, noon. She stared at it for a long time. Her breath trembled. Her heart, traitor that it was, whispered something she wasn't ready to admit aloud. Maybe, just maybe, not everything had been a lie. That night, she stood by the window again. The city shimmered beneath her, alive, forgiving, infinite. The blue dress hung nearby, the fabric catching the faint light. Her reflection met her gaze. And this time, she didn't look away. Because even through hurt, even through doubt, something inside her still believed that kindness wasn't weakness. That love, when real, returns, even if it takes the long way home. Sunday came dressed in quiet sunlight, that kind of soft gold that feels like forgiveness. The city was slower that morning, even the streets seemed gentler. Elena stood before her mirror, staring at the blue dress hanging like a memory reborn. She had hesitated all night, the letter resting on her bedside, her heart battling between pride and hope. Part of her said, don't go, protect what's left of your dignity. But another voice, smaller and braver, whispered, go, because maybe this time someone means what they said. So she did. She slipped into the blue dress once more. It felt different now. Not a reminder, but a choice. Her choice. She tied her hair loosely, took a long breath, and stepped outside. The place was the same. The boutique where it had all begun. Sunlight spilling over the display windows, the faint hum of traffic, the bell that had once marked humiliation and kindness in the same breath. Elena stood across the street for a moment, heart pounding, wondering if he would even come. But then she saw him. Daniel stood near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, eyes searching the crowd until they found hers. When they did, his face softened, a quiet relief washing over him. He crossed the street slowly, like someone afraid to break the moment by moving too quickly. "You came," he said softly. She nodded. "You asked?" Silence stretched between them, not hostile this time, just fragile. Daniel took a breath. "Before anything else, I need to say I'm sorry. Not for buying the dress, but for not telling you the truth sooner. I was afraid if you knew you'd think what you did, that I pitied you. But I didn't. That day, when I saw you standing there, you reminded me of the person I used to be before the world taught me how to look away." He paused, his voice quiet, almost trembling. "My company, it's true, it owns that boutique. And when I found out what that clerk said to you, I fired her. Not out of anger, but because I realized I'd been leading a company that allowed people to think cruelty was acceptable if it came with profit. You changed that." Elena blinked, stunned. "I changed it," he nodded. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That decency isn't an accessory you wear when it's convenient." She looked at him for a long time. "Why tell me now? 'Cause honesty is the only thing left between us," he said softly. "And if I lose that, I lose everything that mattered." Her eyes shimmered. "You hurt me. Dan, I know." His voice cracked. "And I hate that I did. You didn't deserve to doubt your worth again. Not because of me." She turned her gaze toward the shop window. The same reflection, where she'd once seen herself small and invisible. Now, her reflection stood tall beside his. "You know," she said quietly, "for a long time I thought life was something that happened to me. I stopped expecting kindness, stopped expecting love. But that day you made me believe again, and then you broke it. And still I can't hate you for it." Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. He stepped closer, the space between them thinning. "Then maybe we both needed to break a little, to see what was real underneath." The street around them blurred. Cars, voices, the world moving as they stood still in the middle of it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded paper. "I drew something again," he said, handing it to her. She unfolded it slowly. Another sketch, but this time of two figures. A man and a woman standing in front of a boutique window, light pouring over them. Her in the blue dress, him beside her, not saving, not rescuing, just standing with her. At the bottom he'd written, "Some people don't need to be changed. They just need someone to believe they already are enough." Her lips trembled. She looked up, tears glinting in her eyes. "Why do you say things that make it so hard to walk away?" He smiled, tired, honest. "Because I don't want you to." The sound of a passing bus filled the air, followed by quiet again. "Daniel," she said finally, "I don't know what happens next. I don't have grand dreams or promises. But I do know this. I don't want kindness to scare me anymore." He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. "Then let's start there," he whispered. "No promises, no rescue, just truth." She nodded, her hand tightening around his. And in that moment, under the sunlight, beside the same glass window that once held her reflection of Tao, Elena smiled, not the shy, fleeting smile of someone grateful, but the calm, full smile of someone who had finally reclaimed herself. Later that day, they walked together by the river again. The city moved around them, children laughing, pigeons scattering, the wind playing in the trees. She carried her sketchbook this time, and when they sat down on their familiar bench, she opened it. Daniel watched as she began to draw. "What are you sketching?" he asked. She smiled. "Not what, who?" He laughed softly. "Should I be worried?" "No," she said, eyes still on the page. "You're smiling." He did then. That quiet, true smile she'd come to know. And as she sketched, the light deepened over the water, painting the world in amber. The moment stretched, delicate, real, alive. Weeks turned into months. The investigation cleared his name. Her art began to find small audiences online. Simple sketches that spoke of dignity, healing, and small kindnesses that change everything. People began to notice her. But when asked what inspired her, she always gave the same answer. "A stranger who reminded me that dreams aren't measured in money. They're measured in grace." And sometimes, when the cafe closed at dusk, Daniel would come by and they'd sit in the quiet. No need for words. Just presence. Love, as it turned out, didn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it only needed patience and the courage to be seen, truly seen. Months later, on an evening washed in golden light, she stood before the same boutique window again, now under new management. Inside, the mannequins wore dresses from a local artist's design collection. At the bottom of the display, a small sign read, "The Blue Dress Collection, inspired by courage, not status." Elena smiled softly. Daniel came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "You did it," he said. "We did?" she whispered. The wind lifted the hem of her blue dress, the one that had started it all, the one that had once made her feel small, now making her stand tall. And as they walked away, sunlight followed them, warm, forgiving, endless, because love doesn't always arrive perfect. It arrives brave.